Hey everybody, Natalie here for part 2 of my book review on The Slow Regard of Silent Things by Patrick Rothfuss. Now, this part of the video is going to be quite different from the first video I made on this book. The first one is a general overview of the plot of Auri and her characterization, of how it differs from the Kingkiller Chronicle by Pat Rothfuss, and primarily the things you should know before getting into this book, so that you have accurate expectations of this book. Now, the second part of this video is going to be quite a bit different. It may contain some spoilers. Mostly it will just contain interpretation. The book has a lot of different layers in how you can think about it, and needless to say, my husband and I read it together and we got different interpretations based on who Auri is, what she's experienced, and the implications of the storyline itself. And so if you want to just read it yourself and not know anybody else's interpretations, I would suggest you not watch the rest of this video. But if you are interested and want to know what my husband and I thought of the book and how we interpreted it, then this is the video for you. So let's get started. The first thing that we noticed, actually my husband noticed this before me, but it is very possible that Auri is insane. One of the ways that you can notice this is in reading her sentence construction. She speaks and says words and fits concepts together in a way that is not entirely normal. For example, she will say things like the fish were turning in her stomach instead of saying that she had butterflies in her stomach. And she will say her skin went all goose prickle instead of saying she had goosebumps. And so there are very little ways that you can notice that she is not quite normal in how she thinks. This might just be because it's a different world that Patrick Rothfuss has created, but I would warrant that it is because she thinks slightly different from the average person. The second thing he noticed was that it's very possible, if not entirely plausible, that she's depressed. Obviously, you might not see that in the text. One of the things that I mentioned in my first video is that this novel is very esoteric, so you might not understand what she's experiencing unless you felt it yourself, or you might interpret it totally differently based on what you have experienced. And so that is simply something that my husband saw in the text. I had a similar moment later on when Auri was having an experience that I identified as an anxiety attack. So the part that really stood out as an anxiety attack to me is finally she backed around a corner and sank trembling to the floor. She needed everything to not come all apart around her. It continues to say she was dizzy, askant, and slant. And that definitely, when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, she's having an anxiety attack. I totally know what that feels like. So once again, esoteric. That's what I got from it because that's what I've experienced. You might find something different. But needless to say, those three things do entirely reshape who Auri is as a character. The fact that she might have something that triggered a certain amount of insanity, the fact that she does experience depression, she might experience anxiety, all of these things can really help formulate how we feel about Auri and how we read her experiences in the book. So the second thing I'm going to talk about is something I've already mentioned in my first video on this book, and it's the fact that very little is actually described. Her surroundings and the objects around her, most often we know how they feel, which is a really interesting phenomenon. I would suggest that it's because she's projecting her emotions onto the objects around her. So when her blanket is frightened to touch the floor, I wonder if that's Auri's feeling, or if Foxen is feeling all mountains one day, I wonder if that's how she's feeling. Now, it is entirely possible to take this from a fantasy perspective and say that she might honestly understand that these objects have a certain amount of feeling and sentience to them, but it is also possible that she's projecting how she feels on the objects around her. Which takes us into the next point that I thought was interesting. My husband pointed out that there is a magic system in this world. Because I have not read the Kingkiller Chronicle before, I did not know that, but he did, and so he pointed out that there is a magic system and that there is alchemy, and that it is very possible that Auri is an accomplished scholar, craftsman in both. And there is a moment in the book that you can tell that not only is she very good at alchemy, it is very, very plausible that she is very good at magic as well. And so it is entirely possible that you would interpret her interaction with her surroundings as her ability to sense and understand the true way of things, what she would call the proper way of things, but it might also just be a projection of how she feels. So that leads us into our next point. The fact that she could know and understand magic and is very, very good at alchemy leads us to wonder, was she a university student? And this really is just the question, what came before this? This takes us actually to page 133, where I think we had one of our most enlightening moments of this book. And it's when she is spiraling out of control mentally. It says, like a wrist pinned hard beneath a hand with the hot breath smell of wanton wine, ... So I didn't notice it at first. First I just thought, oh, something's wrong, her world is going askew again. But later on, Spencer said that it's very possible that Auri was raped. Now, if you have not read the Kingkiller Chronicle like me, then you might not have picked up on this, or you might not understand its implications. But because he was able to let me know that Auri's character has a bit of a history to her, and it is implied that something happened to her when she was a university student, potentially that she was raped, as is very subtly applied in The Slow Regard of Silent Things, and that it's very possible that she killed a person because of it, and she withdrew to isolation to the underthing. And so that small revelation, that small possibility entirely changes who Auri is as a character and how we understand her. One other thing that supports this idea is that she is portrayed as very small, and she talks about the desire to step lightly, the necessity to step lightly so that she doesn't disrupt the way of the world, so that she doesn't make a mess of things. Needless to say, she sounds like someone who has been a victim and who's trying to be small so that she isn't targeted again, or who's trying to move gently with the world so that it doesn't fall apart in her hands. Another description is constantly said over and over and over again that Auri washed her face, she washed her hands and feet, and she does that constantly. And that compulsive behavior doesn't necessarily say, oh, Auri is a rape victim, but it can say that she is experiencing compulsive behavior as a way to cope with something that's wrong. So it might be the possibility that she was raped. It might be washing her hands, kind of like Macbeth because she killed someone, you know. It might be anxiety. It might be depression. It could be a million things. But these little moments where things become compulsive, where things become repetitive, where she starts to spiral out of control and little hints of her past are dropped, I would invite you to think about what you think the implications are. Those are the ideas that my husband and I came up with, but whatever implications you find entirely change Auri's character. And it's a lot easier to understand her and to, if not identify with her, then to sympathize with her because of the possibilities of her past experience. So now I just have a couple questions for you before I wrap up. I'm going to go ahead and read them. I have them written down so that I ask them correctly. The first one is, what is the significance of desire? As you read the book, you'll notice that she calls herself a greedy thing sometimes. She always wants things, but she'll always stop herself saying that's not the proper way of things. So as you read it, think about that. What is the significance of desire? The second question is, what's the significance of 3 in the last few pages? We know from religious significance and other numerology that 3 is usually a sign of completeness, whole, and true. I think it would be very interesting to think about why 3 is significant to Auri and what that means in context. Another question is, what does the proper way of things have to do with the magic system? Does it have anything to do with the magic system? And you might not be able to really decipher that without reading the Kingkiller Chronicle. I'm having a hard time coming to any conclusions because I haven't read it, but it's still something worth thinking about. Auri exhibits a lot of behavior that shows that she's been hurt or that she's dealing with things that leave her slightly broken. It might be an interesting question to see, do you have any similar habits? Do you identify with her? How do you identify with her? And just to think about the novel in a more personal, interactive way with Auri's character. And finally, last 2 points. The first one has to do with the title. What does the slow regard of silent things mean? Well, I have two ideas. The first one is on page 51, and it's the first time that phrase is ever mentioned in the book. It looks like this with the pipes drawn along the page line. And it says, better still, the slow regard of silent things had wafted off the moisture in the air. I would suggest that the slow regard of silent things might be an expression for the essence of everything in this novel. It could be the atmosphere, but it could also be the way of things. Now, the reason I think it's possible for it to be the way of things is because of page 144, where she begins by saying, oh yes, she'd learned her craft. She knew its hidden roads and secrets, all the subtle, sweet, and coaxing ways that made one skill within the art. So many different ways. She continues on later saying, but now she knew much more than that, and she's referring to the formulae and secrets that people use in perhaps alchemy, perhaps magic. So much of what she thought was truth before was merely tricks, no more than clever ways of speaking to the world. They were a bargaining, a plea, a call, a cry. But underneath, there was a secret deep within the hidden heart of things. Auri found that secret for herself. She knew the true shape of the world. All else was shadow and the sound of distant drums. And I think that that could be a way to interpret how we should read the novel. Auri, in a way, is a plea, a call, a cry. In order to keep her world proper, she'll do certain things, almost like she's bargaining so that she can keep her world the way she wants it to be. And similarly, she is full of secrets. She's full of mysteries. We don't know the half of what Auri has experienced or why she is the way she is. And in that way, Auri has a hidden heart of things. And it might be that we have to read this book as a slow regard of silent things so that we can hear the plea, the cry, the call of Auri and of the things around her and of ourselves and of a lot of things that surround our everyday lives so that we can understand the hidden heart of things. And I think it is very likely that this title teaches us how we need to read this book. And finally, the last thing I want to mention is actually a visual element in this book. There is a recurring image. It's not exactly the same, but it is very, very similar. It looks like this. It is Auri sitting outside next to a chimney, tucked quietly waiting. The last page of this book, spoiler check, looks like this. It's Auri sitting at that same chimney. The moon looks a little different, but she is not hiding away behind it anymore. She is sitting on top of it, waiting in anticipation. The chapter title is called Coda. Now in music, a coda is you start the piece and you get to a certain point where you'll see almost like an S symbol, and that shows you where to return to with the coda. Then if you continue, you'll get to the coda sign, which signals that you need to go back to the S symbol, and then you keep doing that. And a coda, Alphine, means that once you get to the coda again, you continue to the end, and the cycle stops. But a coda is just a cycle. And so when we get to the last chapter and see this coda and we see the picture, you start to wonder, okay, well, what's the symbol that I'm returning to? And I would suggest it's the picture that's almost identical to that last picture seen. This one. So when you finish the book and you have to return to somewhere, is it here that you're supposed to return to? Now, the implication of this is that this section, this chapter, is called A Quite Uncommon Pleasant Place. And everything that happens from this point onward is about this much, right? And so is this aspect of her existence, of her waiting for Kavoth or waiting for other things, waiting for her life to get under control maybe, does this happen again and again and again without any seeming end? Because it's not a coda Alphine. It's just a coda. So that's what I'm willing to pose to you as my final question. Is this artwork really showing us the implications of the final chapter title? And is Auri's existence almost on repeat until she can find a way to break the cycle? The other thing to be aware of, though, is that coda also, as a word, it means tail. So it could mean the end. So it might just be like the way of saying Alphine, like at the end of French movies, you know. But who knows? That's where the mystery comes in. That's where the question comes in. Is it an endless cycle, or is it simply a way to tell us the end? And with that, I would sincerely invite you to read The Slow Regard of Silent Things by Patrick Rothfuss. There are so many more things you can find. There are innumerable layers to this book depending on the experiences that you bring to the table as a reader. And it's a book that you can read again and again and again for that simple reason. And with that, that's this book. I hope you read it, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you find a lot there. And I will see you guys next time on Novel Thoughts for whatever books we discuss. And if you want to subscribe, the button will be right here. Bye, guys.